Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are back at the 1857 First American Chess Congress, another game, Paul Morphy against Louis Paulsen. And this is game 5. After 4 games, Morphy is in the lead, but only by a margin of 1 point, as the second game was drawn and the third game went to Paulsen. So in game 4, Morphy again won a game, not an easy game, but he did win it, and now we're at game 5. So without further ado, let's check it out. Morphy again with the white pieces, and a lot of you have been asking me how come Morphy again has the black piece, how come Morphy again has the white pieces. Well, it seems in those days you had like white and then you were black 2 times and then white 2 times. It wasn't like back and forth like today. I mean, I don't really have in term and regulations anywhere written how they went about this, but it does seem so. But okay, Morphy again with white opens again with e4, and Paulsen again with the Sicilian. We have knight f3, e6, d4, and captures, like in the previous game. Knight captures, bishop to c5, and now in the previous game Morphy decided for bishop to e3, but here he goes for the modern knight to b3, attacking the bishop, bishop back to b6 now, and knight to c3, continuing development. We have knight to c6 by Paulsen and bishop to f4 now. Again, Morphy wants to pile up on the weak d6 square. Maybe knight to b5 will be an idea, and should hinder black's development. And here knight g to e7 is a move that's even played today, although very rarely would black go for such an opening. But in those days, e5 by Paulsen. And it's important to say that this position after move 7 has never been reached again, and for good reasons. Morphy goes back. Now there are really a lot of weaknesses. You no longer have the e6 pawn here to support your d5 advancement, and it will be extremely difficult to execute d5 in the future. But okay, knight g7 and bishop to c4. Morphy continues development. We have castles, and now knight to b5. Again, going for this d6 square to really block black's development. And now, if this was a modern game, a modern master, a modern master would go for d5 here. He would give up a pawn for active play. For example, after e captures on d5, now you go knight to a5. You attack the bishop, knight captures, bishop captures with check, and after c3, now you go a6. Push the knight back, a3, now b5, bishop to b3, and now queen to d6. Blockading the passed pawn. Knight to f5 is coming, attacking the bishop. Maybe ideas like h5. Black would get active play for the price of 1 pawn, but Paulsen decides for a6 first. We have knight to d6 now, and bishop to c7, now hoping to get rid of the knight this way. Not right away. First he wants to move the knight and then get a double attack on the knight here. We have a4, stopping b5, and now knight to g6. Continuing development, we have queen to d2 with the option of still castling kingside and queenside both, and now queen to f6, developing the queen while threatening just to pick up the knight. And here Morphy just defends it. He could castle queenside, but he plays rook to d1 instead, saying that he will in fact castle kingside. We have knight to f4, and now as the g2 pawn is under attack, Morphy now castles kingside, and h5 now, threatening h4 to force this trade on f4. And here Morphy could decide to keep the tension with h4, but he decides to go for knight captures on c8 instead and grab a pawn. We have rook captures on c8, and now queen captures on d7. So Morphy up a pawn, and now knight to d4. Here Paulsen is having some sneaky ideas with some like rook, maybe rook f to d8, maybe sort of try and trap the queen, but Morphy says nothing of the sort works. He plays knight captures on d4, and now e captures on d4. If you try something like rook f here, just to prepare the captures, then Morphy had in mind just bishop captures on f7. As he's now temporarily up a piece, so he can give it back any way he wants. And after captures, captures, and captures, now you just go back and you are up 2 pawns. Great game for white. So after knight captures on d4, Paulsen instead goes e captures on d4, and now Morphy goes back. Queen to f5 with a double attack on the knight, and now forces a queen trade as he's up a pawn. Paulsen says, alright, we have captures, captures, and now bishop to e5. defending his d4 pawn, and also having ideas of maybe d3 and picking up the b2 pawn. So bishop captures on f4 first by Morphy, bishop captures, and now comes rook captures on d4, grabbing that pawn. Although other ideas were also possible. Yes, the bishop is under attack, but maybe better was bishop to d3, just blockading and then figuring out what you're gonna do. But Morphy decides for rook captures on d4 instead. We have bishop to d4, bishop to e5, attacking the rook on d4, and now rook to e4. We have bishop captures on b2, and now rook to b1. And it seems like Morphy saw one move further than Paulsen, as now if the bishop moves, the pawn on b7 falls. But it is in fact Paulsen who saw one move further than Morphy. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for black here. How do you continue this without giving up anything else? While I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that white definitely has some back rank issues. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook f to d8. Now saying if you grab my bishop, of course it's mate. It's not mate right away, as you could block with the bishop. The problem is if you capture with rook captures here, then first rook captures on c4, and now there is the threat of mate, so you will not you will not be able to capture the b7 pawn. You will first have to make some breathing room for the king, and also the rook here is hanging, so f3 pretty much the only good move for white. And now you captures, and you deal with the b7 pawn, either by defending it or by counterattacking white's pawns. So that's the best thing for you to do here after rook f to d8. So rook f to d8, and now what can Morphy play? Morphy decided to go for g3 first, and now comes rook to d4. This is the important move. Now again threatening to pick up the rook, while also if the rook moves, you will lose the bishop. Now the bishop is attacked twice. So now if rook captures, bishop captures, again you don't have time to pick up the pawn because the bishop is hanging. So after bishop d3, now you play b6, the pawn is nicely defended here, and everything is in order. So Morphy went back, bishop to d3, and now rook captures on e4 by Paulsen. We have bishop captures on e4, and now rook to c4, again with the counterattack, going after the bishop. And here bishop captures on b7, just going after the pawn. If bishop to d3, just attacking the rook, then rook to b4, defends the bishop, and everything is fine. So instead Morphy went for bishop captures on b7. We have rook captures on c2 now by Paulsen, and bishop captures on a6. Morphy is now up 2 pawns, and he has a passed a pawn, but Paulsen had everything planned out. He plays bishop to d4, now with an attack on the f2 pawn. And Morphy has to decide whether he wants to give it up, as he does have a doubled f pawn, so maybe it's not a crime to give up the f2 pawn. One way to go about it would be bishop to d3, but instead Morphy decided to defend it with rook to f1. But we do have to check bishop to d3. For example, if bishop to d3, then you could capture with the rook, and then rook to b4, saying that any discoveries will be met with rook captures the bishop, as the bishop is the one delivering check. So bishop c5, you would go rook to b8 with check, king to h7, and now discovery doesn't really do anything. You can just block with the g6, but now rook to b5, again saying any discovery will be met with rook captures. So bishop back to d4, rook to d5, and now bishop to e3. And now finally king to h1, getting away from any discoveries. f6 blocking now, f6 by white, and now a5. You can continue pushing and maybe try and do something with this position, but it still will be very hard. However, Morphy, instead of this, decided to go for rook to f1. He decided to defend it and not to give anything up, but now rook a2. Paulsen just puts the rook behind the passed pawn. Bishop to b5, defending it, and now king to h7. And here it's very hard for Morphy to develop his pieces, because you cannot push f4 due to the pin. You cannot play king to g2 and then push the f pawn because of this pin. So you cannot play king g2 to h3, because then you just lose the f2 pawn. So it's not easy. So here Morphy decided, as Paulsen played king to h7, to go bishop to c4 to trade the a4 pawn for the f7 pawn. And Paulsen gladly grabs the passed pawn. Rook captures. We have bishop captures on f7 by Morphy, and now h4, wanting to further ruin Morphy's pawn structure. If captures here, then then yes, Morphy is up 3 pawns, but those are doubled pawns, and we have bishops of opposite colors, so Paulsen is very confident that he will be able to hold this. So instead, king g2 by Morphy, and rook to a1 now, forcing a rook trade, saying that I know that this is a draw, or is it? But okay, bishop to g6, check by Morphy, king g8, and now trade. You don't really have a lot of other options. We have captures on a1, bishop captures, and it was in fact in this position on move 36 that Morphy and Paulsen agreed to a draw. Morphy is up 2 pawns, and he could try to push for more than a draw, but it is very unlikely, as it is objectively a draw. So just to throw in a few moves, we could try, let's say g4, try to get some moves in, but then bishop to d4, not allowing king h3 to pick off the f2 pawn. So let's say f3. Now you're gonna go bishop e3, and if king h3, you're gonna go bishop g5, and there's no way for the pawns to ever cross the dark squares, and you're never touching this pawn. Let's say king g2, you want to go the other way around. King f8, you're gonna go king f2 or king f1, doesn't really matter. You're gonna go, let's say king f1, you're gonna go h3, now getting hold of g2, and now you're also gonna grab hold of g3, so you will never be able to grab hold of the pawn. Even bishop f4 prevents it, and now attacks the pawn here. King g1, king e7, now king f6 is coming, and so on. So that way doesn't really work. So another thing you could try, for example, after g4, bishop to d4, again with the same idea, is maybe f4 by white. And then we get e3, you go after the pawn, king f3, bishop g1, you play h3. Okay, all of your pawns except this one are on light squares now, which is fine. But then black starts bringing the king into the game. And now, okay, g5, king e7, and now you're going to play king e4, but now bishop to c5. And again, you don't really have a way of continuing to push. Bishop h5, bishop a3. And you can never get f6 in, because if you touch e5, then just bishop to b2 check pushes the king back. And if you try some sneaky moves like f6 captures and g6 to try and create a passed pawn, black will say not a problem. King f8, we have king f5, and now bishop to b2, just defending the pawn here. And there is not much you can do here. If you go after this pawn, bishop c1 now says, okay, if you capture it, I'm going to capture this guy. If f5, then bishop g5 just holds, and there is no problem. You can never cross the dark squares. But of course, Paulsen knows this, Morphy also knows this, and it was in this position, hence they agreed to a draw. So game 5, yet another draw, but Morphy still leading by a margin of 1 point, so the match still going in his favor. Paulsen will definitely have to do something. He's getting a lot of good play with his Sicilian, and Morphy still not handling the Sicilian as well as he should have. But we'll see how it goes. Maybe in the next game, Morphy will finally stop being frustrated for that loss in game 2, and maybe starts to produce some ideas that we are used to seeing from Morphy. But we will have to wait for the next game to see if that actually happens. So that's it for this game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Daniel Holbach, Julio Pena Luli, Moritz Roche, Marian Cepok, and Matthias Jakob for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Morphy saga and checking up on your wonderful suggestions. And also, I just wanted to mention, I'm thinking of making a video on maybe an opening or something, maybe not an entire video on an opening, maybe just a part of an opening or something. So do you have any preferences on what opening you would like to see? I'm not going to go too much into depth, just pretty much an interesting ideas of the opening, how to approach it, how to treat it, and stuff like that. So if you would enjoy something like that, do share in the comment section what kind you would prefer. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.